Welcome to the Skull King Football Podcast, presented by Vox DFS Firelines. Now, here are your hosts, Justin and Ryan Skullrood.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Skull King Fantasy Football Podcast. We hope you enjoyed your Independence Day celebrations. Hopefully, everybody stayed safe with all of their festivities. This episode today, we're going to be doing draft strategy, some differences of opinion on where to take quarterbacks, tight ends, running backs. I have a few do's and don'ts of your draft in general. Today's show is brought to you by Vox DFS Firelines and VoxDFS.com. Vox DFS Firelines is one of the industry leaders in consulting and providing DFS lines for just about any sport on any platform. MLB, NASCAR, NFL, MLS, PGA, basically any sport that you can do daily fantasy on. Vox DFS has consultants for you. There was a major special going on currently. For $25 a month, you can subscribe to their information. And so one of the other pieces of information that we want to cover before we get into some of the draft strategy today, we currently have a special going on right now on the Skull King merchandise, currently from now until July 10th, as a celebration of Independence Day, as well as giving back to our nation's military. All profits from the Skull King merch going on right now through July 10th. All profits are going to be donated to the USO and their efforts. And so, Ryan, if you want to talk about some of the merchandise that's available on some of our T-shirts, as well as some of the jerseys that we have available for purchase through the website as well.
All right. So as far as it goes for the actual merch for going to the USO, that's all the stuff that comes from our sweatshirt sales.
Yes.
So if you want to get like a Skull King hoodie or a Skull King T-shirt, we have iPhone and Android cases. We don't have posters yet. We're looking at that one. We do have kids T-shirts as well. So we've got a lot of those things that, again, what we sell. We've already actually sold a few sweatshirts, I believe, that have helped us raise a little bit of money to go towards the USO. So again, all the profits from our Skull King merchandise sold through the 10th are going to the USO to honor our military and their families and the sacrifices that they make to help keep our country safe and independent. And then on top of that, we wanted to go over a couple things. We will be doing a giveaway for the end of this month. We haven't decided exactly what we're going to do for the giveaway and how it's going to qualify everyone, other than if you sign up on our Patreon page to be a supporter for, I want to say, is at least $5, we'll automatically enter you into the drawings. The giveaway that we'll be doing this at the end of this month is right here. This is a T.Y. Hilton signed picture. And then for those on Twitter, let me lower it so you guys can see it as well, right in front of my face. It has the certificate of authenticity as well, so you can see that. There, let's back it up. I don't think people on Twitter saw it all that well. So we have a signed T.Y. Hilton thing that's going up that will be given away at the end of this month. And then we've got a couple of jerseys that we're selling on the website. We've got Eli Rogers signed jersey. Again, the certificate of authenticity is in there. And then the other jersey that we've got for sale on the website is a signed Jay Ajayi jersey. So, again, that's going to be for sale. That's for sale on the website as well. So, that's what we got. So that's what we're doing to kind of help raise a little money for us. And then again, like I said, all of our Skull King sweatshirts and T-shirts and all that kind of stuff that we sell through the 10th will be going. All the profits from those will be going to the USO to help support our military and their families. All right. Anything else, Justin?
Nothing. So we'll get into some draft strategy now. kind of where we want to start. Ryan, if you want to describe and kind of go through the reasons why we believe in a tier system, and then from there we'll kind of go back and forth on kind of do a round robin, one at a time, and then open discussion on each point. So if you want to start with tiers, we'll go from there.
All right. So as far as the reason that we go with a tier-based system, for the longest time I drafted on a pure ranking system. So if this guy was ranked above this guy, that's who I took, and that's who was available. What I've done is I've moved to a tier-based system that kind of leaves a group of guys so that you can kind of group them yourself how you want to rank them yourself, so that you can kind of judge back and forth. If you've got a whole bunch of tier 2 guys, wide receivers that you like, but only one of your like tier 2 running backs is available, you want to go that direction. It gives you a little more. It gives you more options to work with. It doesn't hold you down to, well, this is the next guy available. This is the best guy according to my rankings. I need to take him. So that's why we go with a ranking instead of a.
You mean a tier instead
of a ranking system. So. All right, Justin. Anything else?
For me, one of the things that I always look at, and I'll just start to go into some of my do's and don'ts. Number one for me is don't be a homer. We all know the guy, and I'm just going to use the Cowboys because there always is a super crazy Cowboys fan. But we all know the guy that's going to take every Cowboy player that they know of, including the kicker. In some years, it may be okay to carry an extra Cowboy, but for me, you don't want to have more than, at max, 3 players from one team, and that should be the star. So in the example of the Cowboys, you could have Ezekiel Elliott, Dez Bryant, Dak Prescott, but the problem is this. If the Cowboys have a bad week, you've lost. It doesn't matter what the rest of your week did.
Pretty much.
One game ruins you. So to me, sharing your wealth, don't be the homer. Be a fantasy football student, not just a Cowboys fan or a Seahawks fan or those kinds of things. In a league I was in last year, obviously this person was an absolute noob to fantasy football. They took Russell Wilson with the first overall pick. They had the number 1 overall pick, and they took Russell Wilson. And I laughed and told him he wasn't going to win, and he ended up second to last place. It's just one of those things. Understand the game, understand what you're supposed to be doing, and don't just grab your hometown players.
Or your favorite players just because they play.
Or your favorite, yeah.
Yeah.
I like Russell Wilson, but I probably won't draft him as a quarterback for my team.
Nope.
Even though he's going to have a better year than he did last year. And so, what about you, Greg? What's a piece of information that you would like to share when you're getting into draft season?
Yeah, just preparing for a draft.
Well, ideally, you're a commissioner of a league that you found around a bunch of homers being in it. So for those of you who want to employ the strategy, there are those of us who really, really do appreciate your effort. I can't agree more with the don't be a homer. Obviously, my thing is staying away from players who are likely to be injured or who are going to miss any time for some other kind of issue. So I try to stay away from drafting head cases on my team, people with known drug issues, like Ezekiel Elliott this year with the domestic violence stuff. That could relatively cost him time this year. And if you look at where he's ranked, does that give you any pause in taking him?
For me, so far, no. I really think that the only reason that on that, I mean, if we go with that point, I think the only reason that the NFL is really looking into this any further is simply because it's a domestic violence issue that they have been hammered on so much over the last few years on not handling that well, that I think that they're just covering all. I think they're going to go to the ends of the earth to figure out exactly what happened and whether or not he should be suspended. Really, I think that's the only thing going on here. I don't think anything's going to happen to Ezekiel Elliott as far as this goes. So, but I understand where you're coming from with that.
Right. Those are just, the general things that I'm going to look forward to not draft. That's why Le'Veon Bell's never on my team either. He's either injured or questionable on account of drugs. He's a dual threat guy. So I would never draft him. I would never draft the guy.
Yeah, the league wants to, and this is a good thing, the league doesn't want to have another Ray Rice incident.
No.
One, that's not good in general, but two, it's not good for the league. It's not good for the Shield, whatever their mantra is. But really, I like that the NFL is taking a step up to prevent this, or to prevent tucking it under the rug and all this kind of stuff and trying to hide it. But yeah, it's one of those things that, to me, Ezekiel Elliott's a little bit lower. But to me, it's one of those things, and you touched on that well, why David Johnson is, to me, the clear number one running back to take.
Yeah, agreed there.
And so, Ryan, how about you give us the next piece?
For me, my thing is always come prepared to draft. Take all of your notes before you go into the draft. Have all your notes ready and done. Have your cheat sheet done and ready to go. Whether it be your list of rankings that you have, or your list of the guys that you want to look at and try to draft with some backup plans. Don't be the guy that takes the magazine that you bought on the store shelf into your draft with a couple of highlighted things and be like, oh yeah, where was this guy and start digging through. Screw that. Okay. We actually have on the website, I'll have to figure out where it is. If you sign up for our mailing address, or for our newsletter, we actually have a cheat sheet that we will send you. It'll have areas for you to fill out: the quarterbacks you want to draft, the wide receivers, the running backs, the tight ends, everyone that you're looking at, fill out, and the rounds that you think you can possibly, the round range that you can possibly get them. You can have all that filled out, something like that, to go into your draft so that you're ready to go. Don't be unprepared. Do some mock drafts. Do some things to figure out where people are going before you go into your draft.
Okay, my next piece kind of piggybacks off of that, in that, yes, you want to be prepared. You want to come in with pieces of paper. I normally come to the draft with more scratch pieces of paper than everybody else combined, because I over-prepare. But to me, you want to go into the draft. You don't want to go into the draft with a quote-unquote ironclad plan. To me, I'm going to teach everybody a new word tonight, and this is kind of a word that I love, and it's called flexure. It's flexible structure. And the reason why you want to do this is, if you go into a game plan, if you go in with a strict game plan, oftentimes you're going to lose out because you're going to dictate to your game plan rather than understanding what the draft board is giving you. I'm sure we'll touch on this in just a little bit about runs and making sure that you start them as opposed to being on the back side of those. And that's, you want to get what the draft board is giving you. If everyone is going hog wild on running backs, take a wide receiver, because there's better value at the current spot at the wide receiver position than trying to grab the 12th running back of a 12 running back run. Go grab that wide receiver, because now everyone's going to go get wide receivers, and you're going to get stuck on the back end of another run. So to me, go in with a plan, but as it says in The Art of War, no battle plan survives contact with the enemy. So it's one of those things. Yes, go in with a plan, but understand that your plan needs to be structured yet very flexible to what the draft board is doing and how the draft is going.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I had a draft. One of my drafts last year kind of went that direction where I thought that I was somewhat trying to be flexible, but I still had my own plan in place, and for the most part, I was able to stick to it. That doesn't necessarily mean it worked. There probably could have been a little bit of value that I passed up, which I'm kind of rethinking some of the things that I do with my drafting this year. So, but yeah, I think that's a really solid way to go.
Greg, what about you? What's another one you've got?
Yeah, I think it all depends, right? There's different kinds of drafts where maybe your draft order going in, or if you're blind when you get there. So that's where I get, what are you preparing for? I think you need to know, you need to have your own strategy, the way you like to build your team, what's going to work in the league that you're in, and understand that if you play in multiple leagues that have different scoring systems, don't take the same strategy into every single league. You could be, first in one league with the same strategy, the same team in another league, and you're, middle of the pack or last, right? Because the scoring is different. So I think that's build around and really understand the makeup of your league. I like being in leagues for a long time. I don't like it when I'm always invited to join some league at the last minute, right? And like half of the league is turnover. Right. I don't know who I'm playing with. Right. So I like to have relationships with the people in the league. I like to know who I'm likely to be able to, trade with, who's going to draft who, where. I like knowing who the homers are in the league.
Yeah.
Yeah. I personally like the quick to react guy, the guy who the second an article comes out that's slightly negative, or the second someone just has a monstrosity of a day and it's really kind of a fluke scenario, they do whatever they can to go grab that person, or they do whatever they can to let go of that person. And we'll get a little bit more into that when we talk about season-long strategy. But to me, I love picking on the guy who doesn't study really and is too quick to react on some of those things. You can really take advantage of some of those quick to react people. But you don't necessarily know who those people are if you're just joining a league. So obviously you do want to know who you're playing with, who your big challengers are, who you can really kind of mess with, pick on, take advantage of, those kinds of things.
All right. So is it my turn again?
Yep.
All right. So we've covered a lot of things. I think once you actually get into your draft, you've got to know how to manage whether you're going to be the front end of the draft, the middle of the draft, or the back end of the draft. For me, I honestly hate being number 1 and I hate being number 12, which really sucks for me because in the Scott Fish Bowl, I am the 12th pick in my division. But I think for me, just again knowing which way to go, like Greg was saying, you got to know the players that you're playing with, know what what their tendencies are, know who they tend to. Especially, I've got my work league, knowing that guys that I play with every single year try to draft the same guys. It helps to know that. So that's kind of where that I'm. Again, know the guys that you're actually playing with. Like Greg said, being in a league with people that you know. I think that's a really solid thing. I think we need to get into actually, where we go with, once we're actually in draft, let's start talking about how we draft players.
Okay, Ryan, how about you take the lead on that?
All right. So for me, I tend to play. We actually had a question on the Facebook live stream. So Daniel, yes, I'm answering your question. I'm answering your first question now. He asked, about the zero RB strategy. And if you heard our mock draft episode from last week, you would know whether it's a standard or not. We happened to do a zero running back strategy anyways. I think, what was it? We took 3 wide receivers, a tight end, and a quarterback. No, I think it was a quarterback, 2 wide receivers, and then and then finally a first running back. So yes, I play mainly PPR. So I stick for the most part to a 0 running back strategy when I'm drafting. However, I do modify that when it comes to whether or not I'm the first pick. I'm not going to pass up David Johnson.
No.
To take Antonio Brown, because David Johnson he's going to catch the ball a lot. He's going to get a lot of touches. So, again, that goes back to being able to modify. But for me, I'm a 0 RB guy, especially if I'm towards the end of the draft, and that's where a lot of the wide receivers are going. So, yes, 0 RB is a thing. So I like that. If I'm playing in a standard league, honestly, it goes more to who I think I can steal, who's available when I'm picking. So.
Yeah, really quickly, I want to touch on the other question that came in about thoughts of Hooper as a tight end too. Personally, I don't believe necessarily in having 2 tight ends or even having 2 quarterbacks, because a tight end goes down, you can pick them up off the waiver wire and get waiver wire value on tight end much deeper than you can from the wide receiver running back perspective. So I would rather carry more wide receivers and running backs, and then I'll stream backup quarterbacks and tight ends. So thoughts on Hooper as a tight end 2? I think Sarkisian's going to do more with tight ends than Atlanta did last year, just in understanding how he coached at Washington. And he had an incredible talent in Austin Seferian-Jenkins as his biggest target, but he did go to multiple tight ends, so it may be spread out more than just going to Hooper. Just to touch on that piece there. And so, but getting back to some kind of in strategy things, I'm a big believer in the 0 running back strategy. I do PPRs as well, mostly because in standard, I think that the running back position is way overvalued, and that if you don't get, you're almost forced to take a running back in the first round, regardless of who it is, because you need a running back to carry you through the season. And I believe in getting a little bit more overall with my leagues, in that I think PPR gives you more well-rounded value throughout the league than a standard where it's so heavily towards yardage as opposed to some other parts of the game, as in being involved, catching the ball, and those kinds of things. Plus, I always like streaming or picking up guys like a Danny Woodhead who are going to catch the ball out of the backfield, or James White, something like that. So I like PPR as well. And so for me, I like to get my wide receivers before I get running backs, because I think in PPR especially you can get value at the running back later.
Agreed. Greg, what kind of leagues do you usually play?
I usually play PPR, and I'm generally going to have a 0 running back strategy. I do like to get my wide receivers early, and I also tend to draft quarterbacks a lot earlier than anybody else does. So I'm even looking at like the overall this season. Me personally, I'm probably taking, if I look at our overall ranking on our website, I know I have a quarterback being drafted probably within the first 5, by the 5th pick or so. I'd rather take a Tom Brady than I would than LaShawn McCoy, for as an example, or Aaron Rodgers for that matter this year. Every year at the end of the season, by the time you get there, more often than not, it's either a quarterback who's led the league in scoring or quarterbacks dominate the league lead in scoring. And if you look at ESPN last year, you have David Johnson, who had a phenomenal year, but the next 3 guys on there are quarterbacks. Then you get a couple more running backs, to Andrew Luck. And this is in a season where Tom Brady didn't play, for the first 4 games. So you would have had another quarterback up there as well. So at the end of the season, it's about scoring points, and an elite quarterback is going to put up those points consistently week after week. And so that's why I usually like taking one in the first round, especially if I'm down at number 10 or 12 and I know nobody's going to take a quarterback. I'm definitely taking a quarterback at that pick.
Well, here's my counter to that, Greg. You look at the scoring. Let me actually, while I'm talking, I'll pull this up. But if you look at the scoring, the top in most leagues, the top usually like 25 players, 15 of them are going to be quarterbacks. So, yes, you can get the top one early, but if I can get like the 7th or 8th best quarterback, who, while yes, he's not going to score as many points, and he'll probably be averaging probably 3 to 5 points less per game than, say, Tom Brady or an Aaron Rodgers. The reason I would wait until mid to even later, or why I even took Stafford so late last year, was because Stafford, I want to say, finished around number 8 in terms of quarterback scoring last year. Let me see overall season total. Let me actually make sure I've got it right. Fantasy points. Matthew Stafford was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. In the scoring that I have on my league, he was the 11th best scorer, 11th or 12th best scorer, and I got him in the 13th round. So yes, he scored 100 less points than Matt Ryan, but he still at the same time was a quarterback that scored a massive amount of points that I was able to pick up late. I can understand your reasoning for getting one of those top guys. I have one league that I play in where I have gotten Tom Brady. I got Tom Brady 2 years ago, and he helped me finish second in the league, but that was because it's a half point per completion league. And those leagues, for the most part, where I would go after quarterbacks early, or again, talk about the Scott Fish Bowl, where it's a super flex league where it's 2 quarterbacks. You get, one of your flexes can be a second quarterback. Quarterbacks fly off there. You have no choice but to take quarterbacks early. So yeah, I can understand the reason that when it comes to a single quarterback league, I would prefer personally to wait later. But I know other people that have the same thoughts when it comes to drafting a quarterback early.
Well, yeah, the other big thing with it too is, though, while you're right, yeah, you can get those quarterbacks late, and I'm not saying that you can't, but there is a massive differential, especially when you talk about a separation of 100 points. I mean, at least in the fantasy leagues I'm in, yeah, you have your blowouts week to week, but most games are fairly competitive. So to have a 5, 8, 10 point differential in scoring average is significant. I think your bust potential is far lower with quarterbacks as well, versus running backs. How many people have been burned by, let's see, Adrian Peterson, Jamal Charles? I mean, these are
Todd Gurley.
I mean, these are guys who, have gone at the top of drafts, right, and delivered absolutely nothing. It is rare that you see that happen with a quarterback, unless you're taking somebody who's injury prone,
True.
But it's, there was a fluke that happened with Tom Brady. Outside of that, it doesn't happen. It hasn't happened with Aaron Rodgers. It's not an issue for Drew Brees, right? So these guys, year in, year out, you are getting something that's rock solid and consistent there. Yeah, we could have gotten, hell, Matt Ryan wasn't drafted in a lot of leagues last year, right? So you could have gotten that guy on the free, on the waiver wire.
Yeah, well, and again, part of that was because the not so great season he had the year before.
The not so great career he had the year before that, because he was never somebody that you really wanted from a fantasy standpoint. But last year he was phenomenal. So I mean, I do get your point, but I think that when and especially in our system, when we're talking about tiering, I mean, there's just no way I can justify taking last year. They had DeAndre Hopkins, ranked above any quarterback out there. Really? You really thought that was a good pick going in? You had to know his numbers were going to be down. So some of those, at some point, that's where I say, if Brees on the board or, Brady, whatever, those guys, I will take them in the first round over some of these other guys who are, borderline first round guys.
Yeah. For me, just a really short rebuttal to that is, for me, how I look at my roster is I want my number 1 receiver to be better than someone else's number 1 receiver. I want my number 2 to be better than someone else's number 2. My number 3 to be better. And if I take quarterback early, yeah, my quarterback is better, but I feel I sacrifice my wide receiver 1, 2, 3, running back 1, 2 to now be below most of the rest of the league in how they're set up. So for me, I would rather have better value for the rest of my roster and take someone like a Matt Stafford, who I can get later in rounds and still produce, that I now don't have to sacrifice and we're talking minuscule amounts, but for me, I want to have a higher tier through the deeper parts of the roster in the running backs and the quarterbacks. It's the same reason why in a super flex league or a 2-quarterback league, now people take quarterbacks early because you need to have a good one and you need to have a little bit more depth there to level it out. You can't have Brock Osweiler and Ryan Tannehill be your 2 quarterbacks in a 2-quarterback league. You just can't do it. So for me, unless you're in a 2-quarterback league, I try to defer to grab someone around, and the earliest I would go would be like a Russell Wilson, Matt Ryan. I personally wouldn't go get a Drew Brees, a Tom Brady, or an Aaron Rodgers, because I think it's just a little too early, and you sacrifice your 1s and your 2s and your wide receivers and running backs. So that's me.
Think about how many people are going to draft Andrew Luck really early this year, because everyone is expecting him to be the quarterback 1. There are a lot of people expecting him to be the quarterback 1 this year, and for me, I think that's
what's telling them that.
I don't know. I honestly don't know.
His line is magically better.
I don't know. So, sorry, we're kind of double teaming on.
No, it's fine. But
Greg can take it.
If I look again, it's scoring last year. David Johnson was number 1 on most people's boards, I think, going into last year. Some people even only had Antonio Brown, right? But Odell Beckham, DeAndre Hopkins, look at where those guys were ranked going in. Look at where they finished, and that's decent separation versus what Aaron Rodgers produced. Just saying, at the end of the season, it's about scoring points. So I definitely see what you're saying. I don't want to go and skip 1s and 2s, but if I'm drafting at the bottom of a round, which anytime I'm in a draft, I never get the first pick. I'm 6 through 10 or 6 through 12. I'm at the bottom.
Lucky.
Right?
I'm always at the bottom, and I like 4 to 8.
Yeah, like that. I like being and I don't necessarily mind 6 through 12, but at 12, if I'm picking there, by definition, all the true number 1s are gone at both running back, and if we look at our tiering system, in many cases, you're taking a guy that you're saying, oh, he's still pretty good, and I'm going to put him in there, and at the end of the season, he's going to finish with 100 points less than the quarterback. So maybe I pair 2 there. It's not like if I'm at the end of the round, I'm not getting 2 picks, right? But I need some kind of stud out there. I can't trot out the 12th best guy, each time.
Just really quickly on that note about being a 1 or a 12, I hate those positions, and here's why. Because there's so much time between your picks. You're like, okay, I'm going to wait 30, 40 minutes now, and any number of things can happen on the draft board. Maybe you're looking to get a quarterback with your next pick. Say, like, you're the 1 and you're trying to get the quarterback with your 4-5 scenario, and everyone's taking quarterbacks in the 4th round, and you got screwed on the back end of it. That's where being the 1 or the 12 really hampers you, because you're such at the mercy of the flow. You can't hop in to start a run or to be a part of the run towards the earlier stages. More than likely, you're screwed at the end of it.
And that's what gets me. Again, Scott Fishbowl being the 12th pick, 12, and then coming back at 13. I have 8. They allow 8 hours because guys are all over the country doing this. It's 8 hours per pick. So it's not like it's 3 minutes on like a minute or minute and a half or 2 minutes on Yahoo. There's 8 hours allowed, a maximum of 8 hours between picks. So I'm going to have like 3 days between picks. and then pick Bam Bam, and then another 2 to 3 days before my next pick.
That's insane.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm still looking forward to that. But
It's almost like the guys who wait in line 3 weeks to get on American Ninja Warrior.
Well,
yeah, those people don't have jobs unless they work at a gym.
Right.
Because one, who's got that time to devote to jump climbing a wall? And two, who's got that time to sit in line for 3 weeks?
Right. It's not like it's a Star Wars opening. It's American.
all right, we actually, man, Daniel, I like that we've actually got someone invested in actually spending time on the podcast here with us and following us. Daniel Spencer, and I'll give a shout out to his YouTube channel. It's the Unintentional Grounding podcast. He put up a question for us. Do you guys draft QBs based on a defense's ability to keep them on the field? I think for me, it's defenses can help. I don't necessarily. I mean, I put a little bit of stock in the defense when it comes to a quarterback, and again, that's why a guy like Tom Brady will be up there. Defenses help, and I think, again, that's another reason why Russell Wilson tends to be a little bit higher. I don't necessarily look at it. I look at guys more of who are going to be throwing the ball all over the yard that I can get at a value. So, again, I go back to Matthew Stafford, who's going to be going for 42, 44, who would have thrown for more yards last year, by the way, had he not injured the middle finger on his throwing hand halfway through the season and played through it, which really hurt his accuracy. And plus, they didn't have a running back who could stay healthy for longer than a quarter of a game. So,
yeah, for me on that note, I don't let the defense dictate my quarterback, and I'll use this scenario of the Denver Broncos. The Denver Broncos have an incredible defense. But because they have an incredible defense, that doesn't mean I'm going to go out and draft Trevor Siemian or Paxton Lynch.
No, but I think more of what Daniel's saying is, would a defense's ability to keep the quarterback on the field be the deciding factor for you between two quarterbacks who are close?
You want a crappy defense is what he's saying. That's why you want, Matt Ryan and Drew Brees. What do they have in common? They both play with crap defenses. So
yeah.
Their defense is constantly getting blown off the field. They're playing from behind, having to get back on the field and throw it all over the place. That is where, there's a lot of reasons I would never draft Joe Flacco, but one of the reasons is Baltimore's defense. They end up getting in grinded out games, and Joe's not going to get as many opportunities as Drew Brees when his defense is getting constantly blown off the field.
Yeah, the Saints are atrocious at defense, yet Drew Brees still manages to be a top-performing quarterback year in and year out. And what was it, the game that was it 2 years ago where him and Eli Manning were throwing the rock all over the field? I think one threw for 7 touchdowns, the other threw for 6. Both of them had over 450 yards. You liked those quarterbacks that week, and neither one of them had a defense that was worth a lick. So, for me, I don't mind people using that as the tiebreaker, but I personally wouldn't use it as a tiebreaker in my quarterback decision.
I just think it's a coincidence overall when you look at things, because Brady would be the anomaly, right? Brady puts up fat numbers, and generally New England has a highly ranked defense. Brees and Ryan put up good numbers. They have crap defenses, and Aaron Rodgers is kind of middle-of-the-road defense, right? So there's no necessarily a rhyme or reason to it. I do think that there's a higher propensity, if you do have a talented quarterback playing on a bad defense, that he's just likely to have good numbers. Not a lot of wins, but just good numbers.
Well, I think that kind of played. Let's be honest. That kind of played a little bit into why Blake Bortles 2 years ago had the year that he did, was because of garbage time. The defense was so bad, he was on the field all the time, having to throw the rock all over the field. So, I think that plays into it a little bit as well. All right, Justin, what point do you have next? And how about you, at this point, why don't you bring up kind of the rest of some of your do's and don'ts points, and we'll kind of discuss them.
For me, kind of one of these is to understand where you can get value deep in the draft. We've touched on it very, very, very briefly, and we've talked ad nauseum about the quarterback position, but especially at the tight ends. And this is where I want to kind of throw it to Greg, because he has the differing opinion from the quarterback perspective. Is, Greg, where do you like to look at tight ends? Are you willing to go up? If you grab, say, a Tom Brady, are you willing to go up and grab a Gronkowski, a Reed, an Olsen at tight end as well, knowing that there are people like myself, and Ryan does this often as well, that prefer to take tight ends and quarterbacks way late? Do you think that can put yourself – so let me refocus the question. Would you take a quarterback and a tight end in the first 4 rounds?
Yeah, because I've actually done that, and went to the playoffs actually with that. Happy, it was actually my first. It was my top 2 picks, but I was picking 12th. So I ended up with Brady and Gronkowski. That worked out just fine. I didn't cry about that. So I think it depends on the tight end relative to the receiver, right? So if you have, and Gronkowski isn't in that lock mode because he's always injured. And I don't think any tight end is right now. But at a point where you do have those guys who are locked in, I am willing to take them over other alleged number 1 wide receivers, right? So that's – I'm not going to come up that high to get one. I generally play with really weak tight ends. I tend to stream tight ends. I stream defenses. And I usually stream a backup quarterback unless I went like running back, wide receiver, target, and I drafted a weaker quarterback late where I'm trying to grab some guy with upside where I need a solid backup to him, right? Where it's not going to be somebody that you can just count on week to week, and I don't want to have to rely on streaming a quarterback. So that's the only time I'm going to bring in a QB2, but I rarely carry 2 tight ends.
Yeah, same here. I don't carry 2 tight ends. I don't carry 2 QBs. I've had to stream QB. Was I dumb enough to draft Tony Romo one year, and then so I had to play around with Ryan Fitzpatrick and Tyrod Taylor for the second half of the season, and still almost made it in the championship game. So, so that's I like to draft tight ends where I think I'm getting the best value. If I see someone like here's the deal: I don't draft Gronk. I don't draft him because I think that Gronk always gets drafted too early personally, especially now with his injury history and how many times he has missed so much time. So I avoid Gronk. I probably won't draft Jordan Reed because he has concussion issues that he deals with. I like Travis Kelce. I like Greg Olsen. However, in some of my leagues, they go earlier than I would like to take them. So I try to find value with my tight end. If I can get a value with, say, one of those 2 guys, say Travis Kelce or Greg Olsen, say drops to like round 5 or 6, yeah, I'm jumping all over him. Other than that,
neither one of those will be there in round 5 or 6, though.
Depends on your league. But yeah, probably not. But if one of them possibly slips through, yes, then I'm more than happy to take a guy there. But for the most part, I will wait until a little bit later. Some guys really like, say, like a Zach Ertz is a guy that you could probably get late. Finished as like the tight end 10 or 11 this last year. So getting guys like that that maybe you're not going to get quite the consistency. But again, I will probably wait until later to take a tight end. So.
Yeah, for me, the earliest tight end I would look to take would be a Greg Olsen. Currently, I think around 4 or 5 on the tight ends, and that's because he's Mr. Consistent. The last 3 years, he's got 1,000 yards. Last year was a down year for Carolina in terms of touchdown production. So he had 3 touchdowns instead of his normal average between 5 to 7. But he had 3. But he still was a very well producing tight end. But to me, Travis Kelce is going to go too high. Once again, I like to try and take a little bit later on tight ends. But moving on to another draft strategy, and I always find this one interesting, is how worried people get about bye weeks. For me, don't let bye weeks dictate your drafts. Obviously, you don't want to have a roster full of guys on bye week 5. But at a minimum, having players, but having 6 different players at the end of your year will be different than what you had at the beginning of the year. At minimum, if you're a fantasy player and you're looking to pick up players on the waiver, you're active in trades, your roster will not be the same at the beginning of the year as it is at the end of the year. So I'm fine having maybe 4 or 5 guys on the same bye week, maybe 10, 11, 12, because they're less likely to be on my roster at that time, or all of them be on the roster at that time. And so, because then maybe I can trade for someone who's already had a bye week. But to have bye weeks really dictate who you draft, to me, can be a mistake as long as it's after week 5, because it's too early to just wheel and deal drafts by week 3 or 4. Most trades and where you'll see value comes a little bit later. So week 5, I would be a little hesitant, but after that, it wouldn't worry me to have 4 or 5 guys on my roster who all have the same bye week.
Yeah, I've had a couple times where I basically, because of my players that I had a certain bye week, I was willing to take the loss 1 week simply because I had a stacked roster that I want to say like bye week. It was like bye week 6 or 7, somewhere in there, that almost my entire team, like half my team, had a bye week that week. So that was one year where we had like a larger bench than normal. So I was able to do a lot of fill, and I still managed to win that week somehow, some way. But I was not, I was willing, if you've got a good enough team and you have a bunch of studs where you can go up and do that, I think it's fine to have a few people, a bunch of guys on your team with the same bye weeks, because again, as you said, you're going to be trading. You want to be active trading, working the waiver wire and that sort of thing during the season. So it's not a problem to have a whole bunch of guys with the exact same bye week. And again, sometimes if your team's good enough, you can afford to take the loss one week. So, Greg, any thoughts?
No, I'm all for that as well. I think you always take the best player. The only time I look at a buy is if it's an absolute coin toss between the 2 guys and, it happens to be convenient for the schedule. Then maybe, it plays a role. But it's about fielding the best team. And if you have to lose 1 game, you weren't going to go undefeated anyway. The point is to win the championship, qualify them for the playoffs and win the title. So I'm totally fine sacrificing a week, for talent in the long run.
All right. Justin, what else?
Another one is about handcuffs. Now, I'm going to leave this a little open for you guys to discuss the ideology of handcuffs, and then I'll give my kind of piece here at the end. So, Greg, tell us a little bit on your philosophy of handcuffs.
I personally don't. I try at all costs to avoid drafting players that are involved in a handcuff situation. That's just another one of my do's and don'ts. I just don't like it because inevitably I end up getting stuck with some kind of insurance policy that I didn't want. It's like the Tevin Coleman and Devontae Freeman thing. You know what? You would have been just fine with Devontae Freeman and another freaking running back. Tevin Coleman's good, but when are you going to get that production from him? I would rather go and get somebody else who's likely to do something of their own merit than being, dependent on somebody else's situation, whether it's a platoon situation or a potential injury situation or whatever the reason is for the handcuff. I try to avoid it.
I can agree with that. Here's my thing. I think with Tevin Coleman and Devontae Freeman, had it been last year, you could play them on the same roster. I mean, you could have played them both because they had two different roles on the team. Especially in a lot of leagues nowadays where you've got, say, 2 wide receivers, 2 running backs, and 2 flexes. I mean, you could have used both of them on your team. One is a flex, one is a running back. I think that handcuffs are okay. I normally don't draft handcuffs to my own running backs. I will, with like the last couple picks, maybe draft a handcuff to another guy's running back, just to kind of hold as a lottery ticket for a little bit, just to kind of see where things go. As far as handcuffs, what you have to remember is there are some teams and some running backs that don't have a handcuff, that will not produce whatsoever in the absence of the star. So if David Johnson goes down, there is no handcuff to David Johnson.
No.
There's no one. Kerwin Williams is not going to be the next David Johnson. It's not going to happen. Right. You look at other leagues, like, in terms of what's another team? You look at Pittsburgh. I'd be okay to draft someone like James Conner. Is it James Conner? The kid that they drafted out of Pittsburgh. I'd be willing to take him with like my last pick as a lottery ticket, just in case Le'Veon Bell gets hurt or suspended again. I'm willing to do that and go that route because I think that he could be someone that could really step in. It's not going to be, was it Fitzgerald Toussaint? He's not going to be the guy. It's definitely not going to be Nile Davis, who I think he's with the Steelers right now. It's not going to be him. So I'm willing to go with the rookie in that case. But in terms of handcuffing, I'm willing to take guys that have a role already and are productive and have shown to be productive. So it would be like if I were to draft, say, AP is still going really late in drafts. So if that were to continue down the road, if someone were to take like a Mark Ingram and then an AP going that route, I can understand. I won't touch either one of them, but I could see someone going that strategy. Or like I said, if we're going back to Atlanta, if you're going to take Freeman, I'm totally fine with someone at the same time taking Tevin Coleman and playing both of them at the same time. Especially, it's going to depend on how Sarkisian uses them and how we can see how he'll use them in the preseason. But I think that would be an okay way to go as well. So, but as far as handcuffing, I'm okay with I'm okay with drafting backfields. I'm not okay with necessarily straight up handcuffing because, again, there are some players that just don't have a handcuff. There's not someone who's going to be able to step in that role. So, Justin, you're muted still.
Keep the
there we go.
The clicking from the keyboard off the air. But to me, it's don't get handcuffs just for getting a handcuff. It's a dead spot on your roster, and more than likely that will be the first person you drop in early waiver wire pickups. It's one of those things that I also, with a handcuff, you want to look at someone who could produce, like what you said, could produce about 80% of what the starter could do if they fill that role. Someone like Ware when Jamal Charles went down. Someone who can produce on a similar level, or a team that's dedicated to the run. Maybe someone gets Thomas Rawls as the handcuff to an Eddie Lacy, or maybe you get CJ Procise as the double handcuff to both of them, as we're going to make roll jokes all year about ankle rolls and sushi rolls, or egg rolls, or whatever kind of food roll you can, cinnamon rolls, whatever food roll we want to make. But it's one of those things that unless you feel, and CJ Procise can produce, I would say around 60% of what Eddie Lacy could do. He's a different game. He's more of a catch out of the backfield kind of guy. But to get back to the topic, I don't necessarily want to grab a handcuff just for taking it. I would prefer to grab somebody else's handcuff than necessarily mine, because that's when you can really rake someone over the coals. Obviously, taking Henry from Tennessee as a handcuff is a smart idea. I don't necessarily like taking him as early as his current draft is.
Yeah, his
currently at
right now.
I think in the 6th round, 5th or 6th round is where he's going, and he's not a starter. And I would prefer to fill out my starting wide receivers and running backs before I even think about bench, and then I want to have at least 1 or 2 bench spots before I even think about a handcuff. So it's one of those things. Handcuffs, you want to look around maybe around 9 or 10 before you would even think about it. Some people like them, but catch-22 is that it's a dead roster spot, and what are you going to hold on to it? I got burned last year with Henry, trying to keep Henry on my roster all season, and I was dropping other guys who then produced later on, and Henry never became the full starter because the injury didn't happen that I was banking on happening. So it to me, handcuffing, you don't want to you don't want to have more than 1 handcuff on your roster at max. Because if you get 2 and 3, you're really hampering your flexibility on starting positions.
I agree. All right, Justin, you got. Why don't we do one more? We're approaching the hour mark, so why don't we do one more and then we'll finish it off.
I'll do 2 because the second one is more funny than anything else.
Okay.
But it's to understand your scoring systems.
Yeah.
I'm a big believer. I'm going to touch on. I'm a big believer in drafting quarterback later. Greg wants to draft a quarterback earlier, but the difference in values on PPR, half-point PPR, and standard is huge. I personally am not going to touch a running back from the Lions in a standard league. It's not going to happen. But I might think about it in a PPR where they're a little bit more pass-happy. And those kind of things, understanding the scoring system of what you're doing and how your league is set up. In addition, are touchdowns worth 4 points? Are they worth 6 points? Are they worth 3 points? Can you have 2 quarterbacks? Can you use a quarterback as a flex? All these things, you need to understand your scoring metrics really before you get going. And so I'll throw that to you guys, and then I've got kind of a funny one here at the end.
Yeah, I would agree with that. You know, again, when you're talking like PPR, knowing the scoring metrics, especially for like PPR leagues, when you're looking at wide receivers, look at targets. Targets are huge in determining, especially receptions, and just overall, and for the most part, overall performance for wide receivers. Targets are going to be a huge metric to look at for that. Standard, you're going to want to look at who's scoring touchdowns. It's not just the guys that are getting the ball all the time, but you want to look, in standard league, you're going to have a lot more guys that you take as a vulture than others, than say in a PPR league, because touchdowns mean so much more, because you don't have guys getting extra points for catching the ball in the backfield. Touchdowns are so much heavier weighted, really, because there's not all the extra weight to catching passes. So I agree with that one. I know your scoring system. PPR, again, I focus more on wide receivers and the pass catching backs, like you said, like a James White, a Danny Woodhead, a Theo Riddick, those kind of guys. So.
Well, yeah, I had said, mentioned before, obviously you want to know your system. I think as important as that is, stay away from leagues with really exotic scoring systems.
Yes.
I got one of these last-minute invites a couple of years ago to a league, and everything seemed on the up and up. I was looking at the just the offensive stats, and defense is defense, so I thought. Nope. In this league, a top defense was going to score 70, 80 points in a week. And there is no way on God's green earth, unless you went in there taking a defense in the first couple of rounds, that you were going to even compete. It was ridiculous. So stay away from leagues with stupid scoring systems. And just as personal feedback, if your league gives 3 points to a quarterback for a touchdown, the same amount of points that they give to a kicker for a field goal, your league is stupid. Your league's dumb, right? You're dumb. You have some kind of hatred against quarterbacks. You're trying to level things out for the rest of them because the good guys get 40 of them, and that makes you feel bad, so you knock them down to be a kicker. You're a jerk. Fix your league. That's it.
Yeah, it's kind of the communist way of running fantasy football.
Right. Real quick, Justin. I actually have a league where it's my work league. The defenses actually do score anywhere from 17 to 30 points, anywhere based on performance. But I mean, again, we went into it knowing that, and we set it up that way because we set it up basically as a high scoring league. So I mean, there's bonus points for 40-yard catches, bonus points for 40-yard touchdowns, bonus points for shutouts by the defense, all that. So I mean, we set it up as a high scoring league, knowing that's what it was going to be. But yeah, if you go into something like Justin invited me into a church league of his one year,
stupidest league ever.
And the draft was you set up your rankings and then the computer auto drafts. It just automatically puts you in whatever. You were not allowed to sit and get into the draft room and draft. It was everyone put together their own rankings. So I had to look at the scoring system in order to set up my own rankings. I think I lost the first 2 weeks of that league and then ended up, I think, going 11-1 the rest of the season and winning.
Yeah, and they overweighted kick return yards.
Yeah, so I mean, overweighting kick return yards. I mean, kick return yards were the same as rushing yards and receiving yards. And then the defense, so everyone scored, but it wasn't PPR. So your top running backs are still only scoring like 15 to 20 points, but your defenses scored 35. Yeah, so again, know your league.
Devin Hester was one of your first wide receivers taken because of his return yardage capability.
Yeah.
Right. That's what you do. First of all, the auto draft league, those things you should not participate in. You should not participate. There's no point in participating in one of those things, right? I mean, first of all, I hate the fact when you have drafts that are online anyway. I like an in-person draft because it's fun. You have to do it online. At least it should be live online, not an auto draft. I mean, what role did you say you had in that? Because you could rank it all you want, and then you end up getting a bunch of guys that, none of them are your top pick. You don't care about your team. You never participate in the thing. So, stay away from stupid leagues.
Well, also in that, it made you get 2 tight ends and 2 quarterbacks. So as soon as the rosters came out, I dropped my backup tight end, backup quarterback, and grabbed somebody off waiver wires fast. But to touch on the difference in a PPR and a standard, just to use the Atlanta Falcons example, the difference between Mohamed Sanu and a Taylor Gabriel as the number 2 wide receiver, there was times where Taylor Gabriel was almost more valuable in a standard league because he was a home run hitter, and he wouldn't get as many catches as Mohamed Sanu, but he was getting just as many yards, but still had the home run ability. Mohamed Sanu is going to be who you want to go with in a PPR league because he's going to get the ball more, but won't necessarily have the freakish speed that a Taylor Gabriel has. So that's to get back to that one. And finally, to wrap it up, I kind of have a how dare you. Don't dare even think or have it cross your mind of taking a defense or a kicker until the last 2 picks. Otherwise, I will come and find you and shake my Dikembe Mutombo finger at you and say, no. Because that's not how you win. You don't take a defense in your top 10 or your kicker in the top 10. This is not the NFL draft. You're not the Oakland Raiders. You're not the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. You don't take a kicker early. You take them last, because there's plenty of leagues that have removed kickers altogether, period. Because some teams, you take the kicker of a team who's a high-scoring offense, the kicker may not be able to hit the broadside of a barn outside the 40-yard line, but he's getting a point for every touchdown. So to me, kickers are the ugly stepchild of, to be politically incorrect, but the ugly stepchild of fantasy football. To me, I pick kickers last. I'd rather have a little bit better defense and pick them with my second to last pick than a kicker.
Yeah, I've always believed in. Sorry, Ryan. I always believed in streaming defenses and kickers, that you don't waste a high pick on them. You do much better just picking matchups, especially with defenses, than you're ever going to do when you just draft one high. You're much better off going for depth. So 100% agree with you on that one. Don't you ever, I guess, and this might have been touched on earlier, but just don't be the guy who's asking in round 7 or 8 or 9 or, maybe even it's round 10, 11, about guys who went 6 rounds early. Don't be asking, hey, yeah, is Brandon Cooks there? And it's like the 11th round. It's like, no, he went in the 3rd round, jerk off. Yeah. Oh, is a Roth what have you been doing while the rest of us were drafting? So just don't be that person. And that's only in a live draft because a computer can keep you from looking like an idiot. But if you're going to go to a live draft,
look at the board.
Look at the board. Have something to blame it on. Get really drunk or just act like, you hit your head. So, something to cover for that because you look like a schmuck.
Agreed. Again, I take a pad and notebook paper with all my notes and my cheat sheet on it. And as people are getting drafted, I cross them off the list. That's how you take care of that. While everyone else in my league, in my one live draft league, they have like the whole sheet of rankings and they're crossing off people as they go. Like I've got just my sheet of guys that I like because I'm one of those weird guys that if I don't like a player, I don't care what kind of value I can get for them. No matter how far they draft, I won't draft them. I like who I like. I don't like who I don't like. I will not draft Alshon Jeffrey. I don't care if he falls to the 8th round. Because I can get a guy that I think may be better off, coming back later on in the season, may have a bigger role later on in the season for someone than Alshon Jeffrey, especially when they've added another wide receiver in Torrey Smith, and they're probably going to be emphasizing the run a bit more since they got LeGarrette Blount. So that's pretty much what I've got. So.
And so thank you for joining us on the Skull King Fantasy Football Podcast. As a reminder, visit the Skull King Fantasy Football page, the merch. Check out some of our merch. All proceeds and profits go to the USO as our way of giving back this Independence Week for our military and those who have served our country. Stay tuned. We will be having a podcast again next week. We're going to be moving to multiple shows as we get close. And we will be doing 5 shows during the regular season, so be prepared for those to start coming through. Once again, this has been the Skull King Fantasy Football Podcast brought to you by Vox DFS Firelines. I am Justin.
I'm Ryan.
I was Greg.
Thanks for joining us, guys.
All right, we'll talk to you guys later. Hey, Skull King Nation, thank you for listening to the Skull King Football Podcast. Did you like this episode? If so, be sure to go to iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and YouTube to subscribe. Also, please leave us a rating and reviews to let us know how we can better help you rule your leagues.